The biggest mistake that some of us entrepreneurs make is that when we start making some money and we experience a handful of good years, we get very, very confident and we think that those good years are never going to end. And instead of putting some money aside, paying off some debt, consolidating our operation, we continue to grow and we continue to leverage and expand recklessly.
You have found Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggle stories and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. Downloadable audio episodes can be found in the podcast link found at drawincustomers.com. We are locally underwritten by the Bank of Sun Prairie, Calls on Call Extraordinary Answering Service, and of course, the Bold Business Book. And today we're welcoming / preparing to learn from Jose Berlanga of the McCall Media Group, and we're talking real estate, business, and a couple of mistakes along the way. Is that safe to say, Jose?
That's right. How are you, James?
I'm
That's
doing very well. I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for being on the show.
part of my reinvention now. I'm starting to write. I'm already on my third book, having a blast doing it. Something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time and finally got around to it. But really, my companies are several others, an umbrella of companies, mostly real estate related. Houstonian Capital, Onyx Land Partners, Tricon Homes, so on and so forth. And the bulk of our activities are residential single family developments, from land development, single family homes. We do a lot of multifamily and some commercial and whatnot. So real estate, I would say, is where I'm at, where the majority of my activities. Not to say that I haven't been an entrepreneur in so many other industries, which is the fun part about my career, that
Yeah,
is very versatile.
nice. Tell me, you touched on a lot of stuff there, but let's tackle a couple here. Tell me about your books. You said 3 books?
Yes, the first one is The Business of Home Building, which it is not about how to build homes, but how to build a company, not only a construction company, a company that builds homes, but just a company in the real estate business. It's very interesting. I try to make it fun. I realized that after decades being in this business, there wasn't one single place where you could go and learn how to start a company in the construction business, not just the technical aspects, but everything that happens behind the scenes. So I wrote that book. It's published. It's out there on Amazon and everywhere else. But I didn't do it just because I was interested in publishing books. It was more of a cathartic process to unload all this information that I had been adding up throughout my career. The second one is about land development, land investing, land speculating, by the name of Dirt Rich. That is
You
coming out
say
in the next.
Dirt Rich?
Yes,
Oh, that's a
yes.
great name. Oh, I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it has a dual meaning, because it's not necessarily rich uh, in the sense of wealth, but it's rich in your blood, in our nature, in our culture, in our history, what it means to select a piece of land and develop it, and how everything in the world is this multi-trillion dollar industry around the world of real estate. It all begins by the proper selection of a piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get a little bit deeper on the second book that I had a lot of fun writing. And the third one is the name is Quantum Entrepreneurship, which is dealing with um, the fundamentals of what it means to be an entrepreneur, the risk, the lifestyle, the identity, the anxiety that an entrepreneur goes through, the life choices that one must make in order to choose that career and live that type of life. So my whole life has been very, very involved in entrepreneurship. I've owned businesses since I was 17 years old, and in many different sectors. So I have a passion for understanding that particular lifestyle of not working for someone, but most of all, always living under that uncertainty of not knowing where your next payday will come from, or if it will come at all. So that is something that I hold very dear, very deep in my in my heart, in the history of my career.
Yeah. So that the quantum entrepreneur, was it quantum entrepreneurship or what was the title?
Quantum entrepreneurship.
All right. So that book, is that geared towards people that are entrepreneurs, or is it
Yes.
more of a warning for someone that's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur?
No, it's not a. Although I have plenty of cautionary tales of what not to do. It really allows you to understand what it truly means to be and to become an entrepreneur, to remove the emotional aspects, to remove the romanticism about owning a business and the misconceptions. A lot of people associate it with freedom, with fun, with wealth, with growth, and it's not quite like that, at least in the early stages. It's a
Yeah,
very,
it's
very
not a
different.
guarantee.
Correct. Correct. It has a touch of craziness to become your own boss because you have to sacrifice and devote your time, your money, you have to invest. You have to work for a prolonged period of time without getting paid. You have to even borrow money from investors, from bankers, get in debt, compromise your credit for a promise, for the hope of getting some money in return and then some and building a career out of it. So you have to be, uh, a little bit crazy, a little bit of a gambler, a little bit of a dreamer. So in this book, I talk about all of the characteristics that might help you understand what it means
Mm,
and then make a better choice as to not only whether this is for you, but also what type of entrepreneur you are. Because within the modern world, it's not defined as one type of identity or personality. It's become very, very diversified, a very broad audience that is interested in starting their own business. And there are so many ways to go about it these days. So I dig into the entire world and the different classifications and the different ways in which you can identify yourself as an entrepreneur.
fair. That sounds like a very interesting book. I'm gonna have to check that out.
It will come out soon, and I'm excited. At some point, I plan to devote a little more time to doing presentations and to discuss them. Right now, it's almost just a side project, just a fun project, while I still have a daytime job,
Oh,
which
I get it. I get it. I wrote a couple books, and though they're fun and it's interesting, once you get in the zone of writing, you almost impress yourself once you get
yeah,
in that zone. Before you get in that zone, you're like, ooh, what's going on?
yeah,
But then
yeah.
once it's out there, and don't bank your livelihood on it.
And it's amazing to complete it. It has it's a great feeling to complete that project. Funny that you mentioned that it's difficult. It's very complicated to put all of your thoughts together. But once you get on a train of thought and you get your thoughts organized, it's impressive how much you start putting together information about any particular subject that you know, that you understand,
Mhm.
that you like discussing. I was even somewhat laughed at in some way because I'm very ADD, very scattered brain. I'm not a heavy reader because I can't focus. I'm always distracted doing 12 things at the same time. But it was difficult to think that I could put together this information and come up with a sequence, with a series of books. But I discovered, that it's a different part of your brain
Mhm.
capturing information. This is a very interesting fact. Reading, absorbing, learning is one part of your brain. Talking, communicating, unloading, writing, and delivering messages is a different part of your brain that is more creative. And I realize that I have more of that. Imagine how interesting for your audience will be interesting to hear that after close to 40 years as an entrepreneur and owned a number of businesses, I'm still learning about myself, my skills, my strengths, my weaknesses, and you never stop learning about yourself. What is it that you're good at? What is it that you like? What is it that you don't like? And sometimes matching that information and understanding it clearly can allow you to have better chances in succeeding with your business. I've made that mistake that I get very stubborn about trying to operate a type of business that maybe I'm not necessarily very good at. And
There.
and it makes it very, very difficult until you naturally begin to understand what your real talent is. And sometimes it takes decades to really get to that.
So true. Oh my gosh. So true. I can remember the first real business that I started. It was copy repair, printer repair. And I chose that business because I was good at it. But it was interesting because once you get in there a couple of years and you're thinking, I don't even really like this that much, and you're busting tail, and I wasn't really making that much money or anything like that, and you realize like I am a rat on a wheel here, and I'm the one that built the wheel, and I
Yeah.
just hopped on and like
This
took me a
is
little while to realize like you can also build a different wheel and hop off this one.
Yes, yes, that is so true. And it happens to a lot of us. And it's a science, it's a real science to understand a number of ingredients that can help you become successful, which is to understand what you like, to understand what you're good at, and to understand how to apply it in the real world in a practical way and execute those ideas. Because, like you said, sometimes you may love a certain industry or a certain business, but you're not very qualified, or vice versa. You're very good at something. That has also happened to me, where I'm very good at certain activities, but I dread going to an office and doing these number of things that just put me in a bad mood. I've done a lot of that. By default, I grew in the era where it was all about responsibility. It wasn't about passion. It wasn't about selecting what your love for any certain activity was. We were taught to survive, to support ourselves, to be responsible, to be accountable. And I did all of those without even giving it a second um, of thinking about whether this was something that I wanted to do or not. And that also took me many years. And I feel like at this point, I don't want to call it a waste because I did learn a lot and I achieved a lot of things. But I feel that I invested many, many years of my life working on things that didn't make me happy, that were very, very difficult. I became good at them by default, by persistence, by repetition. But I could have done many other things with less effort, and it would have been a lot more fun, perhaps.
Yeah, totally understand that. It's interesting that you talked about that the responsibility side where joy or freedom or happiness, things like that weren't even on the table. It wasn't even a thought.
Nobody ever asked me, "Hey, what do you like doing? What's fun for you?" It was like, how are we going to make money? How are you going to support yourself?
Yeah.
Where are you going to find a business, a career, a job? That was it. That was the previous generation that many of us were started with in our careers. Now it's perhaps I'm hoping that it's not too much to the other extreme, which in some cases it is, where the young generation is too focused on finding something that they love and that they're passionate about. And if it's not perfect, they don't want to touch it. They don't want to get near anything that it's just not exciting. I think it's got to be somewhere in the middle, because there is no activity that is just all pleasure and fun, in passion and excitement. So I think we definitely have to pay our dues. We have to work hard. We have to understand that every type of activity has a list of things that are not pleasurable. But ultimately, there has to be something that attracts you. to that particular business or industry. And that's what I'm now trying to little by little identify over the years, where you can blend those two and have the fun and have the passion and have the mission, but also know that it's not called work for no reason. I mean,
Fair,
it is what it is. Making money has never been easy, and it never will be.
fair. You know, it's interesting. It reminds me of when you go to an airport and you see the people that are business attire, even to the point of wearing a suit and jacket on an airplane. And then you have the people that look like they're still in their pajamas because they still have their little slippers on. And they, it's almost like, I think you're a little too comfortable here. Like
Yeah.
this is the world, this is the public. You're going to see the rest of the world. You're gonna have to sit by someone on the airplane. Maybe put a little bit of effort into yourself, just to
I,
show that you have respect for other people.
I do. I come also from that era of formality, dressing up. I love wearing a jacket. I love wearing a tie. Now I don't wear it as much just because it's not used as frequently, but
No,
um, but there are different versions. Obviously, there are different mentalities. Some very successful people are extremely casual, like you said. They almost look like they're in their pajamas, and they claim that the reason is that they can get away with it. They're successful. They're the boss. They're the owner, and they dress like that because they can. And then there's the other extreme of the people who work for the executive world that requires that professionalism in the dress code and wearing a coat and tie. And then there's somewhere in between, which is the one that I enjoy, which you nailed it. It's called respect. It's taking your peer seriously, your business seriously, your society, getting dressed, looking like you mean what you're doing, and having that self-respect over your identity and your appearance that a good portion of the new generation just does not care about. So I think that we like again the balance aspect. We need to find that middle of the road where we still care about our image without necessarily requiring to wear a suit and tie every day. But I do love it. I love those days where people got dressed to get in an airplane. And now, for example, one of my favorite places, my wife and I love Las Vegas.
oh
And I remember it back when people got dressed to go to shows, to go to events, and now it's an extremely casual, almost looks like people are going to the beach. It's a little disappointing in my opinion, but that's where some of the trends are headed.
yeah, you know it's interesting you mentioned the jacket and stuff like that because I just recently started wearing a jacket more often, and it's interesting the shift in your mind when you wear a jacket versus just when you're more casual, whether it's just t-shirt or a collared shirt alone or something like that. I It reminds me of Bill Burr when Bill Burr puts on his jacket and he's like, I feel like I want to take over some stuff.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it almost puts you in a mindset of the entrepreneurial, let's do this kind of mindset versus just you know what? I've earned the right to be casual kind of thing. It's an
yes,
interesting
yes, yes.
mindset. Not necessarily good or bad, but
Correct. It
there's a choice
makes
there.
you feel important. It makes you feel like you're on a mission to discover, to learn, to achieve things. I think it's part of the psychological aspect of success to get dressed and get ready and to look your best and to be your best, as they say, the best version of yourself. And part of it is to take care of your image. At least that's my opinion. I'm sure everybody has their own way of looking at it these days, but to me, it's still important.
Fair. I love it. Jose, let's talk about your businesses when you first started. You said you started your first business when you're 17.
Yes, yes. It was an exporting company in the oil and gas business, machinery for the oil and gas. Um, the industry was very, very different. Latin American countries didn't have ways of maintaining their plants, their factories. They needed a U.S. representative that spoke English, that knew how to find parts and in all of the needs machinery for the maintenance of their companies, their plants, their manufacturing facilities. And I had a lot of contacts because my father was in that business. We worked together. Very few people know the details of that story in that company. He had been in that business for a long time, but he couldn't really operate in the US very well because he didn't speak English.
Mm,
And so I became that link between some of those clients in Mexico and Latin America and the US manufacturers and distributors that provided these services and this equipment. So that's how the business started, and it grew very fast. It did very well. There was very little information. There was no internet. There was no way for people to locate some of these things that were required for the maintenance of their manufacturing facilities. Eventually, that industry became obsolete because of information, because exclusive distributorships and all the factories began to open offices in the different major metropolitan areas in Central and South America. So that's where you pivot, you adjust. But I thought I was going to retire out of that business. It became very successful very quickly, and it was one of the first, perhaps my first major failure in the business world, which was extremely painful. I thought I would continue in that industry for many years to come. So when it failed, it was a very difficult time. I was still very young. I was still in my early 20s,
all
but
right.
but that's all I knew. And it felt like it was the end of the world when my company collapsed.
So were you the one that realized that there was potential here, or did your dad say, "Hey, this is a thing, jump on that ship," kind of thing?
No, it was a combination of efforts. He was more specific to certain products, for example, valves and piping, which he was very experienced in. And I kind of, when I started doing my research here in the US and talking to distributors and manufacturers, in talking to clients in Mexico, they began to inquire about other products. Hey, you're in the US. Do you mind helping me find this motor, this transformers, this electrical panels? I need wiring for this machine. I have, this reactor is down because it's missing these parts. Can you help me? So we started expanding. I started making friends. I was a very social, very outgoing type of personality that started visiting clients and making friends, where before you know it, I was selling from industrial batteries, transformers. I was selling industrial tires, heavy machinery, and we started diversifying because of that. So it was kind of a mutual effort. I had some strengths. This is something I always talk about starting a business, that it makes a lot of sense to partner with someone who has other skills where you can balance each other. And in today's difficult business environment and competitive world, it's hard to be good at everything and it's hard to do everything yourself. I try, even in most of my successful businesses, they happen to be where I partner with someone who had some skills that I lacked. If I was good in putting the business together, they were very technically trained. Or I was good in the marketing, but they were very good in organizing systems and so on and so forth. And you can diversify the spread the responsibilities and go further faster when you partner with the right team. So that's been my trajectory, and I have to admit that in my successful experiments in the business world, I have had the right partner, that we trusted each other, that we work well each other, and that we complemented each other in different talents and skills.
That is cool. I'm just trying to imagine me working at some huge oil thing, and the 17-year-old kid comes up to me and he's going to sell me the part that's going to keep our plant moving. I'm just
Yeah.
picturing what was the reaction? Did anybody say, like, no, 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 we need somebody, I don't know, older to help us out there?
Well, yes, in some respects, I had some of those issues, lack of self-confidence when I showed up to some of these meetings and in some of these sales calls. But I did have other attributes like the one we were talking about. I was always very well dressed. I loved wearing a tie, a suit. I was well spoken. I was very accountable, very punctual, reliable. I would always say what I did and did what I said, and people started to realize that no matter what the age was, um, I was delivering, and most of all, they weren't too worried about my age or anything else other than the fact that I could find them the parts to get their machines going. They had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Imagine if you have a multi-million dollar reactor that's sitting there not producing because you're missing some panel that's a couple of $1,000 and you can't find it. I mean, you don't care who brings it to you.
No, if 2-year-old shows up or a monkey shows up, I don't care.
Yes,
We got to
yes.
get that thing done.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And at that age, of course, you're very persistent. I did a lot of calls, a lot of visits. I tried very hard to find some of these clients, and it worked until it didn't. Of course, economic shifts, currency exchanges hit us very
Oh,
hard.
okay.
So yeah, that also
I didn't even
put
think
put
about
us
that
out.
part. Okay. So when was the moment where you realized, like, oh, things aren't going to go so hot as I anticipated?
Yeah, it was a perfect storm on that first business. It was several things. One, more competitors, more technology, more information began to flourish, to show up in that market. But most importantly, devaluations. We had a few devaluations where we were selling in dollars and they were paying us in pesos, or at least they were exchanging their pesos prior to paying us. So when there was a devaluation, their cost would go up and make it very difficult for them to pay the bill. So they began to delay payments little by little.
Oh,
And in the US, you cannot delay payments to your vendors. So I go and buy and I had to pay right there. And if my clients started delaying 30, 60, 90 days, little by little, I was stretching myself thin where before you know it, we couldn't pay our bills and it put us out of business. So I think it would, and of course, then there's also cycles in some of these industries where they're just going through a difficult economic cycle where they don't have that much that they can buy, or their budgets are very limited for that particular year. So little by little, we couldn't afford paying all of the bills on time without getting paid on time by our clients. And it wasn't that wasn't as overnight as what I've experienced in the real estate world, but it was relatively quickly when that business started falling behind, and eventually I had to realize that this was not going to continue for very much longer. And it's very hard. It doesn't matter what age you are. A question that I'm asked very often: what did you feel? What did you do to get back on your feet? How did you even go about looking for another opportunity? But when you find yourself in that situation of desperation and the stress to continue making a living, some people go into a denial phase, and some people go into survival mode. And I chose a survival mode to start talking to friends and other business owners and see how I could help. And before you know it, I was partnering in other deals
all right.
faster than I anticipated. I thought it was going to be harder than I thought, but it wasn't my first failure, by the way. It
Okay.
I mean, I failed in a number of other businesses, a couple of dozen, let's just call it, without some work well, some didn't. In some, I invested some money that I lost. In some, I participated. I've realized to narrow it down and perhaps to just get to the important point, I've noticed in my career that when I invest money and let it run on its own by a group of individuals that I don't understand what they're doing, I tend to lose the money. But when I put a lot of work and very little money and I build a business with blood, sweat, and tears, as they say, they tend to do better than
Huh.
when I delegate them and just invest in things that I don't understand. At least that's been my luck.
All
So
right.
so I've done better whenever I start something from the ground up and I run it and I operate it. I think the fact that I refuse to fail and I put so much time and passion into things, I give it just a better probability of success. And also when you have a very specific mission and objective, and you understand what you want out of your business and how to differentiate your business from other competitors, when you devote enough time in the early stages of designing the concept, and you're not just doing it to make a profit, which a lot of entrepreneurs do that. They think, hey, I'm going to start this business. I need to make money. And this seems like a good opportunity to make money. It doesn't always that work that way. There has to be more than just a desire to make money.
Fair. Totally fair. Yeah, 1,000 times over. How did you end up shifting from the oil and gas industry to real estate?
Well, it was years later. As I mentioned before that, I was involved in several other businesses, whether I partnered with someone and helped them kind of grow the business, um, invested in some things, this and that and the other. But eventually, we started a construction company, which was a residential construction company with my brother and I, which we became amazing partners because he graduated as an architect. So he had the technical skill,
Right.
the construction, the design, and I came in more as the investor and the administrator of the business with a financial background, with a business background. And between the two of us, we started a very small home building company that grew to a very interesting size. And that, although I had done a couple of real estate transactions prior to that, this was really the entry into the world of real estate, which I've never left. 30 years later, I'm still doing a lot of real estate, but it was almost by accident, being that my brother wanted to build homes, and I didn't necessarily want or need to be in that industry. I was more of an entrepreneur type of personality, but he was more into a very specific desire to build homes. That's what he wanted to do. So I like the idea, and we started our business, and with a lot of effort and a lot of sacrifice, it worked. Over the years, we built it. But it didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't start making money right away.
All right. Was it tough working with a relative? I mean, a brother's close relative.
Yes.
So working with that person as a partnership, that were there any challenges with that?
No. The challenges were the opposite of what most people experience. My brother and I had a level of love, respect, and care for each other that the problem was that we would rarely verbalize what we wanted. I was always trying to do what he wanted, the way that he envisioned the business, and follow his dreams and his objectives. And he was doing the same with me. So in this business, which we managed together for 20 years, a little over
Wow.
20 years, we never had one single argument or discussion or disagreement. And we made and lost millions, tens of millions of dollars, borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars, never had the slightest disagreement. We had a high level of respect for each other's participations in this business, and we weren't doing it in a selfish way where, hey, I just want more of this or more or less. We had full trust, which is what I recommend in partnerships. That if the care and the attention and the respect and the trust is not mutual, be very careful. Very much like a marriage. You have to know upfront who you're dealing with, who you're partnering with. And if you share those values, which, by the way, you don't necessarily have to share the exact same vision or mission, because different entrepreneurs get in business for different reasons. Some want to expand, some just love the technical aspects, some of them just like working, and everyone has a different reasoning, different objective. Some business owners want to expand in achieve multi-market strategies, and some others just want to stay at a certain size, and so on and so forth. You can work those out and manage those with your partners. Having a similar mission is very important. But the number one is to have similar ethics, similar aspirations, and respect for your business and for each other. If you have those fundamental ones, you can fix the other ones. So
Fair.
that,
That's weird because you're talking about culture essentially of the business and the relationship that you have with your partner that you're
yeah,
going to be making these huge decisions with. So
and
yeah.
and it's tough, and you have to compromise very much like parents do in perhaps in your technique to educating your children. You know, one parent may think this is a way, another parent may, but at some point you have to compromise and agree and respect each other and follow each other. At some point, come to terms with what route you're going to take and stick to that. And when you have a good partner that's willing to listen and willing to compromise, and that's just not about him or her, it works well. So you have to be very, very careful in selecting one that at least is open-minded, in that it's not just very, very focused on an area of the business that you necessarily don't have a big interest in. So I've been very, very lucky in having good partners overall. The majority of the deals that I've had, I've worked with very reasonable people that are not only savvy, but they they want to help, they want to contribute, they want to do the right thing. When it all comes down to the world of business, it's all about trying to contribute to society and doing the best you can for your product, for your employees, for your company. So, if you follow those rules, normally it's you're going to get further along and faster if you have good partners.
Fair, totally fair. Tell me, it sounds like the majority of businesses that you've started that you've had mostly partnerships. Is that safe to say?
Yes, yes. And yeah, there's been a few business, small entities, obviously investment entities that I own.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I still do, where I buy investments, where I hold assets and so on. But most of the companies that had some operation attached to it that required employees and management, distribution, warehouses, so on and so forth, I've had partners.
All
Uh,
right.
yes, it wasn't necessarily by design. It was by default. That's just the way it occurred. And I'll admit to something. I'll confess part of why that has happened. I'm one of those entrepreneurs that is very, very good at identifying his or her strengths, but mostly his weaknesses and flaws. in the world of business, I am not necessarily the technical or the creative or the vision guy. And I know that. I understand that. Businesses have been brought to me by people who understand that I'm very good at organization, finances, financial engineering, making the most out of our capital and our resources, building businesses. I'm good at that. But knowing necessarily where we're going, what product to select, what market to select, that never, I'm not the kind of guy who invents things. I've done it. I've even patented some things and I've started a couple of startups, but it was very difficult. I've had a lot of ideas and I've realized at the end of the day that that wasn't my forte. My strength was to partner with people who had a very technical ability to deliver a product, but I had the ability to make it happen. Some people have that product or that idea or that invention, but they don't know how to put it together and take it to market or build it or turn it into an actual company. And that's how I've been lucky enough to have those opportunities and to recognize that that's my part.
That's cool. That's super clever right there. I've meet a lot of people that are the idea people, but as far as implementation goes,
Yeah, yeah.
not a
And
prayer.
and and a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of thinking that because they have some technical background or because they know one sector of the business, it's enough to be successful. And it's not. This is something I repeat over and over. You cannot be successful just by being able to repair a car, let's say. Oh, I'm going to open a repair shop because I know how to repair cars, or I know how to cook, so I'm going to open a restaurant. There's a lot more. There's purchasing, there's distribution, there's dealing with clients, there's accounting, there's cash flow, there's legal, there's when if you don't know those aspects of the business and you don't realize that you need to spend time on them, that you have a big chance and probability to fail. And that's how a lot of them fail because they don't devote time to the other areas of the business. They're not even fully aware of them. So that is something that happens very frequently.
That's you remind me of a Saturday Night Live skit that somebody introduced me to. I think it's a little bit older one, but it was I think it's called That's the Game. And it's got these two drug dealer guys, and the one guy's gonna is holding a gun to the main boss. And he's like, "We're taking over your territory," kind of thing. And the guy's like, "Okay." And the guy with the gun is like, "Where do you get your shipments from?" And then the guy that's got the gun on him goes like, "You got to figure out this and that and this and that and this and that." And the
Yeah.
guy with the gun is like, "Yeah, I don't want to do any of that."
By the time it was all said and done, he changed his mind.
Yeah, he's like, "No, no, 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 you have it."
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah, yeah. You have to be not an expert. I
mhm,
also say this, you don't have to be an attorney or a marketing genius or an operations or distributor of high level, but you do have to know the basics, the fundamentals, and you do have to know what are all the different activities that your business requires in order to succeed.
mhm.
And not all business owners are fully aware of that, at least
No,
in the early stages.
no, I would argue most are not. I can tell you, I teach a business planning class, and I taught a lot more pre-pandemic when more stuff was in person. And there was a woman that wanted to start a donut shop, and we started talking about strengths and weaknesses. And she's like, "I'm not a morning person." And I was like, "I don't know if you know when they make donuts, but
It's not in the afternoon.
yeah, it's not 3 in the afternoon, man." And then we
Yeah,
had another person that was gonna have a retail store. So what are your hours gonna be? Because we're putting together a business plan. And she said 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week. And I'm like, "Great. How many employees are you gonna have?" And she said, "Oh, I'm not gonna have any employees." And I'm like, "You just built a prison for yourself right there." Because then outside of the 12 hours a day, you still got to do the paperwork and the ordering and the inventory and all that other stuff. Like, that sounds like a terrible business to be in.
yes,
But up
yeah,
here, I want to own a store because I have all that freedom and it's fun and I like store things or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't know all
Interesting.
that until we get into it, and we
Yeah.
realize that there was a lot more involved in operating your business. And many of them, the worst part is they neglect it. They let the bookkeeping, the administrative, the hiring, the organizing of your operation, and before you know it, it's a snowball effect, and it's too late to repair it, to fix it, and businesses collapse that way. So yeah,
Yeah. I had a coaching client that I told him, man, you got to get your stuff to a bookkeeper. Get your paperwork is a mess. It's months behind. I'm like, just take it to your accountant, whatever, get this stuff organized. And he's like, okay. And then we meet with him once a month for the next few months and be like, hey, did you send your stuff to a bookkeeper? Did you find a bookkeeper? Send it to your accountant. Did you get your paperwork organized? Didn't have time. I called, didn't get an answer, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, after months of this, I'm like, this isn't getting better. You're not taking care of it. You got to find someone to take care of it. What's going on? And after digging, I realized he was embarrassed. He was embarrassed to take his shoebox of paperwork essentially to his accountant. And I had to remind him accountants exist because people like him and me and probably half the other entrepreneurs in the world, we're not that good at paperwork.
yeah.
So we got to hire people to do this. This is not the first shoebox that your accountant has seen. So just bite the bullet, pay the guy, and get it organized and just move on with your life. Do what you're good at. But it was interesting that that embarrassment was what
Yeah.
was stopping him from actually doing the right thing, which coincidentally or ironically, I suppose, is just going to make it worse.
The longer you wait, the worse it gets.
Yeah. Kill
Like
the
that.
monster when it's small, right?
Yeah, yeah. That is very, very important. And without information, you can't run a business. Without understanding that accounting,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know if you're making money or losing money or why.
No idea. No idea. Tell me about navigating tough markets because you've been doing this for decades and you've seen like there's a little bit of roller coaster that's going on recently with the stock markets and tariffs, blah, blah, blah.
Wow, yes.
But real estate stuff, I'm thinking 2008, 2012, there was a rocky time. 2001, we had .com, we had Y2K. And you were even were you in the 80s in real estate when that whole,
No, 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 but
okay,
I was too young, but friends had lost everything, and friends of my family who lost everything in not only real estate, but in the oil and gas business
okay. Because
region.
I mean, there are cycles. There's
Yeah.
definitely cycles, the good times, bad times. So
Yeah.
tell me about just navigating those tough markets.
First of all, my biggest lesson in navigating difficult markets was watching people lose their businesses. Even before I was in business, watching those horror stories of wealthy families, of successful entrepreneurs go broke, caused a very, very big impact on me. Obviously, not enough because I did my own failing and losing businesses. That was lack of experience, of course. What helped me is that I started very young, so I had time to recover. I had time to start all over and perfect my systems and the logic behind these businesses. But I've been in very cyclical businesses. Again, energy, oil and gas, restaurants and cafes where at some point a competition flooded the market and we were over leveraged. A number of other ones, including real estate, where you need to borrow money in order to make money. And when the market slows down and it catches you with a lot of debt, it's devastating to your business. So it's impossible to prevent altogether and to avoid. But what I tell young entrepreneurs is to be aware that it's coming. Just always be prepared and know that at some point the cycle is going to shift and it's going to change. Don't get too comfortable. The biggest mistake that some of us entrepreneurs make is that when we start making some money and we experience a handful of good years, we get very, very confident and we think that those good years are never going to end. And instead of putting some money aside, paying off some debt, consolidating our operation, we continue to grow and we continue to leverage and expand recklessly. So if you happen to get to that point where you're stabilizing your business and making a little bit of money, start getting organized and know that at some point there's going to be some kind of a shift in the market, and you have to be prepared for it with some reserves, with a contingency plan. So that's my number one recommendation: is don't be in denial. Know that at some point in most businesses, except the ones where you're really innovating systems, software, technology, where there's very little competition, or that it's recession proof, let's say, that you can get away with avoiding all of these contingency plans. You need other ones. That's a whole nother. But in the general picture of the average business, it's just a matter of time before the economy changes and before your sales drop and your profitability is affected, and you have to start reconstructing, rebuilding the way that you do things. So that would be the number one recommendation.
Right on. Did you tell me about the leveraging with real estate? Because if you're building individual family homes, were you building them to sell or to rent out?
Initially to sell.
Okay.
Everything we built was to sell. But in our industry, let's just say you want to build a house, just for round numbers, you want to build $1 million house, and between your uh, land cost and your construction cost, that your total cost is going to be uh, $800,000, and you plan to sell it for $1 million. The bank is not going to lend you all $800,000. They're going to want equity. Let's say they'll lend you 600. So you have to put your own money down to complete the project, to start the project and build a project. So you put $200,000 in the deal. The bank will, in the form of dross, will start releasing money for you to complete your project until it's done. And here's where the problem begins. As you start making money, we had those famous $200,000 of equity in 100 projects. Okay. We started putting equity, which is skin in the game, our portion of the money required to start the project, times many developments. So you have a web of your money involved and invested in an array of developments of all kinds, price points, neighborhoods, designs, so on and so forth. And when the economy slows down and houses don't sell, all of a sudden, most of your capital is not liquid. It's attached to these properties. So you may be rich on paper, but if you can't sell the house and get your equity back, plus hopefully a profit, which incidentally, when things slow down, there is no profit. You're just happy to get your equity back to pay for bills and so on and so forth. But now you have to get your money back to pay other bills and overhead and so on and so forth. So you start getting in trouble very easy, because once you finish these projects, remember that a big portion of the cost is the carrying cost, property taxes, maintenance, interest that you have to pay to your banks. And when you're not selling it, a lot of cash is going out the door to support the debt and no income. That's what happened to us, and it happens again very frequently. It has happened to us more than one time, a handful of times, different levels of debt, different levels of size uh, of our operation. But it's just something that is very difficult to avoid. So what you need to try to do is to always have enough cash flow to support your organization for as many months as possible if you don't have any sales. That's
Fair.
what, yeah, yeah.
So, did you ever come up with an equation or something like that to know we can handle this percentage of debt versus this percentage of what we're investing in, or something to give you a little bit of a
It-
understanding of worst case scenario? Though I understand you don't know, like pandemic. It's
yes,
tough to anticipate that. This whole stuff that's happening now, arguments could be made on both sides whether you could anticipate it or know it was going to be this extreme.
yeah,
I mean, and
absolutely.
then like every time there's a bad day, arguments could be made like, we should have expected that, but hindsight's 2020. So, did you
Yeah.
ever come up with some like, hey, we're over leveraged here right now, it's cool, but if a bad day happens, we're going to be in a little bit of a pickle? Or did you ever, or do you just look at each project individually and say we're good?
No, no, I don't look at each project individually. I look at my company as a chessboard, and I have to protect the integrity of if I have to give away a few houses just to get cash in the door, and I don't operate the company by focusing on one property, but on everything as a whole. And I do have a formula. I will admit that is a guesstimate
Sure.
because nobody knows when things are going to turn, how bad it's going to get, and for how long. So anything that anyone can provide or bring to the table to prevent chaos is simply a guess. So the more, when you have good years, the more money you put aside or the more equity you put in the deal, the safer you are. Imagine that during 2006 and 7, companies were leveraging 7, 8 times, banks were leveraging 10 plus times their equity. So for every dollar they had in their balance sheet, they could borrow 10. So for us, every million we brought in, we could borrow 5 or 6, 7 sometimes million, which was crazy. That doesn't exist now. Banks have learned their lesson. Now we may borrow 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 in some developments. We're excessively cautious, and we rather bring more equity and have low leverage. But my formula, getting back to your question, I normally like to have 6 months, preferably up to a year, of cash flow to support my operation, my overhead, and my development's carrying costs in the event that I don't have a single sale in a year. It's very hard to attain because when you're growing, you don't have that choice. I
Right.
mean, but at the same time, the newer and the younger you are in business, the more speculative you can get and the more risk you can take on because you have less to lose. You're young, you have nothing to lose, and you have nothing to gain if you don't take that gamble. But the more you start building a company and equity and making money, the more you have to lose and the more you have to start being cautious as to how you run each one of these transactions. Now, with that being said, I've seen cycles where it got pretty bad for 2 or 3 months, where the market was uncertain, interest rates went up, nobody was looking at homes, and the market it went into a panic, and we went into a panic, but it started correcting itself. It was a small correction of 60 days, 90 days, all the way to 3 to 4 years, which is the biggest one. That one no one was ready for in 2008, 9,
Okay.
10, all the way to uh, by 2011, things began to stabilize in some markets. And if you were able to make it through, when the cycle turned, we made a lot of money, but we barely made it, thanks to the fact that we had a lot of equity and we had been very responsible through the good years. But we lost a ton of money just supporting the company through those years.
I bet. I bet
Yeah,
I think that's the challenge with real estate. I imagine any other big ticket stuff.
yeah,
You got to be
yeah,
able to afford to maintain that and survive the storm. But once you make it out through the storm, as long as you make it out through the storm,
yeah.
you're
And
golden.
very, very many different business models. I also have to add, mine was a single entity with no investors. It was just our in-house capital that we grew like a pyramid. Other developers and other builders compartmentalize their projects where they do this project under this umbrella, this firm with one investor that brings in capital, and then they borrow money against that project, and so on. And so they separate them with different investors, different lenders. And if they all fall apart, well, they obviously they have the support of the investors that get affected, or maybe one doesn't do well, but the other one does well, and you can spread the risk somehow. We had everything under one bucket because that's the way that our operation was. We had big lines of credit called guidance lines of
Okay.
credit, which are amazing once you start building. If you can get to that level where we were, a guidance line of credit gives you a certain dollar amount from a lender where you make the decisions on what to buy, what to build. Once you approve a certain amount, the lender, that means that you've proven yourself as a developer, and the lender gives you the freedom to make those internal decisions. All they need is an appraisal. But in order for a builder or developer to get to the level where they have guidance lines of certain number of millions of dollars per line of credit, you have to have quite a bit of experience. In most cases, lenders with small builders and investors, they go on a case by case. You bring them a deal, they examine it, they appraise it, they look at it, they tell you how much equity you need to bring in and move forward. With us, it's one approval per institution. Hey, here's $10 million, here's $15 million, 20 million, depending on, and we utilize them as we see fit. It's a huge responsibility because you have personal guarantees attached to those loans.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, but they give you the freedom to select what you want to build, your price point, the areas, the designs, the value of the home, all of those things. They know that you know your business.
All right. I'm thinking a personal guarantee on a $50 million loan. That's not a pill that everyone's willing to swallow.
No, no, you have to know very well what you're getting into and be very comfortable with the product, be very comfortable with the market, with the amount of equity that you contribute, and have a very good plan of attack. Yeah, because it's not just one. Once you start adding all those lines of credit in a bad market, you may be, and that's how fortunes are lost.
Hmm.
Because at some point, you may be worth $100 million on paper, but it's all distributed amongst projects, and the moment the whole thing collapses, the bank steps in, takes over, and your equity is the first money to evaporate. So there's been many, many people who are very wealthy on paper, and when the market changes, their wealth disappears very quickly. So you just have to watch how much you get into and how fast, so that you protect yourself against those famous cycles.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wrote a blog around pandemic time for restaurants about it was just kind of a cheering you rah rah for them to survive. And I think it was titled Anyone But You. Because the idea is if they would fold, someone's going to get a deal on that restaurant, a hell of a deal on that restaurant. And the person that's going to get that deal is going to be anyone but the person that previously owned it, that got foreclosed on or whatever. So is
Yeah,
anyone but you. So just make it through the storm and you'll be fine. But if you don't, you're going to regret it because there's going to be someone else that gets the hood, the oven, the stuff for
yes.
whatever pennies on the dollar kind of thing.
And that's what you don't want to get to that point where you have to liquidate things and let someone else have all the fun after
Yeah.
and lose your credit. That's the biggest one because in the business world, you can lose money. I've lost everything multiple times, but I always, this is something that every business owner needs to understand. And you can make money again. Money comes and goes. but your credibility, your credit, and your history as an entrepreneur remains in record for life. If you get involved in a bankruptcy, if you file for Chapter 11 or for Chapter 7, but any of those official filings, they stay with you, or if you get foreclosed. So I've been very, very careful to protect those, and I'll just use my money to pay off the loans and make everybody whole, because it allows you to live to see another day and start another business. Yeah, you're gonna have to start from scratch, and it's extremely painful, but your record remains clean.
Mhm.
And that's what you want to watch out for.
Fair, fair. Jose, we don't have a ton of time left, but I did want to ask you, you had something mentioned here about hands-on versus hands-off leadership. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Sure, sure. The famous decision or state of mind that an entrepreneur is in their desire to pass on the responsibilities of the business and delegate them versus holding on to a lot of the activities. There are different comfort levels in every entrepreneur, and there are different models. Some are easy to delegate because the activities are very repetitive. They're where it doesn't leave that much to the imagination of your team. One of the things that I've found over the years is that there are responsibilities that require a lot of decision making, a lot of thinking, a lot of problem solving, and you have to be very careful as to how you allocate those responsibilities. There are others that are more repetitive: purchasing, accounting, operations, construction, this, whatever it may be. Those are very easy. You train the right people, you select the right people, and you let them run with those activities. But there are a few that may cost the well-being of your business: or wrong acquisition, borrowing the wrong amount for the wrong deal. Those I tend to get very, very involved. And the bigger the company, the more management layers you can add to your organization, to allow them to make those decisions. I have been, to me, it's been so difficult to build my businesses, and my career has been so challenging that I'm not the best as handing out responsibilities very easily. I'm a little bit of a control freak in certain aspects of the business because it's been too painful to get here. I keep my eye on my cash flow, on the big ticket items, and perhaps I allocate a lot of the rest of the responsibilities. But you have to understand, the point of this conversation is that you have to understand what kind of operator you are, what comfort level you have in distributing responsibilities, but also what type of business model you want to have. Do you want to have the type of business where you're so involved on the day to day because you feel comfortable, because you enjoy it, because this is your baby and you want to keep it that way? Or are you the one who likes to create systems, procedures, a process, a very well established team so that the business begins to run on its own without your participation, and eventually even be able to sell it or pass it on to a board of directors, or hire people to run it for you? The biggest and most important step is to identify what you want out of that business and how do you want it to operate so that you can design it according to those needs. Because what happens is sometimes you want one thing, but you design it for something else. I've made that mistake where I thought in my sick mind and my confused mind that I was building a business when I was in fact building a practice. I
Mm.
was building a business that revolved around me. All of the decisions, all of the acquisitions, all of the signatures, all of the approvals required me. And I wasn't building a business. If I wasn't there, the business didn't operate. Like the
Oh, you
surgeon, if
essentially built a job.
I built a job, a very lucrative job for myself that drove me insane, that never gave me a day off or an hour off or a moment away. Even on vacation, I was on my computer and on the phone trying to do everything. And I didn't realize that that's what I was building until I actually got there. And many entrepreneurs make that mistake, that they're trying to build everything and monitor everything, forgetting that little by little, they need to start building those systems, checks and balances, so that things can continue to move forward even without their presence. So that needs to be well thought of in the early stages of the business.
Fair, totally fair. I do want to ask you one more thing about what was the dirt book that you had? The second one you
Dirt,
mentioned?
dirt rich.
Dirt Rich.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning that that was about picking locations to invest or to build. Is that right?
Yeah. The heart of this book, although the title is fun, Dirt Rich, it's not necessarily about how to build wealth. There's a there's a story behind the title that's in the book, but it's specifically about land investing, land speculating, land development. It has a little bit of everything, a little bit of history, a little bit of how to step by step. Um, it has a little bit of theory and fun information as to how real estate and everything in the world of real estate begins with a proper selection of a piece of land. All the cities that we enjoy, all the communities, the neighborhoods that we live in. How did they start? How do they select where to put the school and the malls and the streets and the utilities and combine the amount of residential, multifamily, commercial, industrial? How were these things, the office space? Uh, why are some things located where they are and what is the proper distribution? All of these things that we take for granted were designed for us by people who understand this science of urban development. And I talk a little bit about it in very general, fun terminology, very, very easy to read, so that it allows you to think, because it's not a complicated book. It's not nothing that anyone will find technical. It'll just make you think things that perhaps you never thought of that occur in order for us to enjoy the cities that we live in. Why do some of them grow faster than others? Why are some of them better kept, better maintained? In restricted versus non, and the zoning, all of those things that will just make you think a little bit different about this resource that we all enjoy.
All right. Very cool. And that book is out, you said?
Dirt Rich is coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Well, Jose, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James. I've enjoyed it and hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. You shared a lot of information. I love having people that have years of experience versus just a year, a few months of experience, because uh, I'm approaching 20 years as an entrepreneur, but it sounds like you're beyond that and have experienced even more and more diverse businesses, I would say. So it's
A
great.
lot
It's
of,
fun to learn a lot.
I've taken a lot of punches.
Yeah. That's
Definitely.
fair.
Yeah.
It's not always easy, that is for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, it's been great being here with you. Thank you so much for having me in your show.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate it. This has been Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggle stories and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. My name is James Cademan, and Authentic Business Adventures is brought to you by Calls on Call, offering call answering and receptionist services for service businesses across the country on the web at callsoncall.com. And of course, the Bold Business Book, a book for the entrepreneur in all of us, available wherever fine books are sold. If you're listening or watching this on the web, if you could do us a huge favor, Give it a big old thumbs up, subscribe, and of course, share it with your entrepreneurial friends, especially those that may be a little new to the game and they don't know exactly the ride that they are in for. We'd like to thank you, our wonderful listeners, as well as our guest, Jose Berlanga. Jose, where can people find you?
joseberlanga.com. I'm easy to find. If you just Google my name, you'll find some fun videos and basic information about me.
Nice. Easy enough. Past episodes can be found morning, noon, and night at the podcast link found at drawincustomers.com. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next week. I want you to stay awesome. And if you do nothing else, enjoy your business.